Thank you for joining us this evening for this very important conversation. I'm Pastor Derek Faison, and I am the senior pastor for the Impact Church here in Goodlettsville, Tennessee. We've called together an august group of individuals who serve our community in various capacities. We have individuals from the Metro, not just individuals, but the top individuals from the Metro Police Department, as well as some other community individuals who are here to have a very important conversation. Those of you who are watching your televisions realize that this week marks the anniversary of the death of George Floyd. And for those of you who don't know, George Floyd was arrested and killed by a police officer a year ago. And his death sparked a conversation all over the world about the conversations that we are having with law enforcement in our community. All sorts of policies right now are being discussed and reforms are being discussed surrounding that incident. And it seemed to be a tipping point as to how we interact with law enforcement and how law enforcement interacts with the community at large. We thought it would be very important for us as a church community that we be involved in this conversation. And we got together some individuals from law enforcement who were just as concerned about the safety of our community and the people that we serve in this city. So I want to introduce everybody around. As a matter of fact, while I do this, while I have each of them introduce themselves, and then we're going to go into our conversation. Why don't we start here on my right and just introduce yourselves and let them know who you are and what you do in our city.
All right. My name is Dwayne Green. I'm the Deputy Chief of the Community Services Bureau. Also, the Office of Alternative Policing Strategies falls under my bureau. I've been with the police department for 21 years, and Community Service Bureau encompasses all of the precincts in the city. And glad to be here.
Thank you. Thank you.
I'm Anthony Hall, member here at the Impact Church, director of our outreach, community engagement. So Anthony Hall.
And I'm Sebastian Gordine, Deputy Chief Police of Support Service Bureau. Been on 21 years. The Support Service Bureau encompasses special operations divisions, warrants divisions, facilities, metro parks. As I tell everyone, I'm the one that get to have all the toys. I got the SWAT, aviation, canine, mounted. So I got a lot of moving parts is what I'm over.
I see.
My name is Alicia James, and I'm a local entrepreneur in the technology space and a former law enforcement official.
Please.
Good morning, good afternoon, rather. My name is Tamara Givens, and I am the Division 8 Deputy and Program Manager with Judge Rachel Bell in the General Sessions Music City Community Court. I oversee all of our day-to-day operations as it relates to the Music City Community Court and our diversionary court programs.
And my name is David Imhoff. I'm an inspector with the police department, specifically in the Office of Alternative Policing Strategies. Currently, we are working on 3 separate programs. One is a crisis intervention co-response team. Another one is a program to reduce gun violence in Nashville, and a juvenile diversion program as well.
Well, thank all of you for taking time to meet with us this morning. I'm so excited about this conversation. Listen, I'm used to talking, preaching, running the conversation all the time, but I'm going to defer this conversation to be led by Miss Alicia James, who is adept at having this conversation between both sides of the fence. And so I'm going to introduce Miss Alicia James to you, and I'm going to let you just take it away and just take us into this conversation, because I can't wait to have this conversation.
Awesome. You know, Pastor, I thank you for having the courage and the wisdom to have this conversation, especially in today's world.
Sure.
The need for the community and police officers and really public servants overall to come together to have meaningful, impactful conversations about what do we do to move forward, right? Like, how do we not stay in this place of uncomfortable conversations? How do we not stay in the place where we can no longer ignore some of the very glaring systemic issues that fall on both sides, right? Like, there are some systemic things that the community has to realize.
Absolutely.
And that law enforcement is charged to do something with, and for that community to come together. So thank you for setting the stage, literally and figuratively, to have the conversation. And so we just saw the video of, did we?
No, you know what?
Are we running the video?
I'm running ahead of the video.
Okay.
Why don't you run that video for me, and then we're going to jump back to the conversation.
The
country, ready to mark the one-year anniversary this week of the murder of George Floyd. As we all remember, Floyd died under the knee of a police officer in a case that brought the issue of racism to the forefront. There will be rallies and marches in Minneapolis, where this murder transpired, starting today. And ABC's Zachary Keish is right there with much more. Zachary, good morning to you.
Dan, good morning to you as well. You know, the markers in this field are a painful reminder of the price of progress in this country. Some of their names are known, some of their stories have never been told. You know, George Floyd lived a life as an ordinary black man, but in his passing, he's been able to do something that most have not. He's been able to transcend the barriers that stand between us, and he's been able to elevate important conversations. A year ago this week, Minneapolis was on fire. Entire buildings, and in some cases blocks. Hearts were broken, and any sense of innocence the city had was lost. What shattered in May of 2020 was the willingness to accept that things were okay.
Well, I was feeling pretty much just frustrated, scared to a certain extent. I'm thinking about my children.
George Floyd, a 46-year-old black man killed by the police over an alleged misdemeanor offense, sparked a movement. An unapologetic recalibration about how we think about race, and a critique on those empowered to provide safety.
I come to tell you, America, this is the time of dealing with accountability in the criminal justice system.
When George Floyd cried out, "Mama," and when he called out, people from all over the nation came. And those people showed up here.
George Floyd's death was different. It was undeniable. Nobody could ignore what that cell phone video said about us.
That changed the world.
In an interview with Eva, Floyd's giving heart and fight for others was so evident in his daughter.
I know what I want to be when I grow up.
What?
I want to be a doctor.
You want to be a doctor?
Mm-hmm.
That's a lot of school.
Mm-hmm. I want to take care of people.
Right here in the Twin Cities, but also on both coasts and eventually the globe. Through the fire, through the grief, the black community found its footing and found allies.
People have to want change and have to be willing to sacrifice some privilege and talk about the things that are uncomfortable.
Last month, former Minneapolis police officer Derek Chauvin was convicted of murder. His abuse of power has had far-reaching impacts on policing here and around the country. In Minneapolis, budgets were cut, policies revisited, and the idea of safety and security were reimagined. Out of necessity, Minneapolis has become a place of healing and introspection.
That hopefully one day our world will change, and that there will be and still will be, continue to be, blind justice. I really want that to happen before I die.
Progress is hard to measure, but we do know that it's often birthed from a very painful place. There's a lot of healing happening here in Minneapolis and around the country this week. We also know that President Biden is scheduled to host George Floyd's family at the White House on Tuesday. Dan?
Well said. Progress often comes out of pain. Zachary Keish.
Yes, so as you see, this is a very, very important conversation that we're having in all sectors on both sides of the conversation. And so I'm going to ask Ms. Alicia James if she would help us to continue to have this conversation. So,
Yeah.
Ms. James.
Yeah, the year that shook the world, right? The year that shook the world. We were in the midst of a pandemic. We were all sitting still, and we watched the murder of a man with an imperfect history. But I think we could all agree that the murder of him was so shocking to the conscience, right? And I think that oftentimes, being a former police officer myself, like I understand the duality, right? Like you wear that uniform and you wear the badge and you are proud of what you represent, but at times like that, right, we can all look at that murder and say, yeah, it's when policing missed the mark. But it's the human element behind the badge that I think that most citizens probably don't think about. And so as we sit here and we watch the video, I want to start the conversation with the human aspect of how that made you feel as an individual. And I want to start off with our law enforcement leaders and then hit our community leaders as well. And so as a man, I want to know how did that make you feel?
So when I speak, I always say this. I speak from three perspectives. As an African American male living in America, as an African American male raising an African American male son, and a black man wearing this blue uniform. And so for me, I have to make sure everybody understand that I have that perspective every day that I put this uniform on. As a African American male, how it made me feel, I was upset about the incident. As African American male raising African American male son, I have conversations with him about things that he's going to have to deal with, no matter what society says. But as a law enforcement officer, I was extremely disappointed because I know the oath of office that I hold, and to see that happen was very disappointing to me. I think it's important for the public to understand that we are human beings, and we do carry these things around, and we have to process these things in order to be able to do our jobs in an equitable fashion. And I think as a member of the Metro Nashville Police Department, community engagement is one of our core pillars, and we want to get involved. We want people to know who we are. So, but as a male figure, being on this police department and as an African American male, I was highly impacted by that. But it also gave me the drive to know that I can be the difference every day in this job, doing what's good, what's right, and what's just every day. Yeah.
And for me, right along the same lines, but for me, it was basically two things. I was shocked and frankly, just embarrassed as a police officer. I was shocked to think that one individual could sit there and do that to another individual, regardless of the race of individuals. I think whether you're white, black, green, or purple, when you saw that video, you should have been shocked. And I was just completely shocked. I couldn't believe that this individual, this officer, just the look he had on his face while he was doing that. I just can't believe that he would do that and there'd be other officers around there and not step in and do something about that. I mean, it's a human being, and he was just slowly killing this human being. And he was being videoed with the cell phone and a crowd around him, and the look he had on his face like he was enjoying it. And that really shocked me. And from a police perspective, I knew the ramifications of that for all of us around the country, that everyone would take a look at that and judge that one officer and put that on all police officers around the country. You knew it was coming, and we saw the effects of that with all the protests that were going on, you know, and something like that just shouldn't happen.
I think the first thing that I thought of when I was watching it and was getting phone calls about it was, first of all, your heart was going out to his family. Not only do you lose a loved one, you lose a loved one in such a public fashion. As a man, as a police officer, I was disgusted, just as everyone else has said. The total disregard for human life and not treating him like a human being, and the lack of the other officers responding also showed that lack of respect for human life. And again, I knew that it was going to have an impact on not only the profession, but our city. And it did. And hopefully there's some good things that can come out of this, even though there was a lot of tragedy surrounding around it. But no, just as a human being, you were disgusted by it. Your heart went out to the family, and you knew it was going to have an impact on our officers here too.
Absolutely. Tamara, I'm gonna come to you next. Pastor, I wanna save you for the end, but Tamara, I'm gonna come to you next.
I think the common thread that I'm hearing here, and I can truly identify with that, in that, first of all, just as an African American woman and an African American mother of 3 sons, and then again as an African American, woman who works in the judicial system, for me, at the end of the day, I think what resonated with me the most was that could have very well have been one of my very own sons. And so my heart literally dropped. My breath was taken away. And the other part of that is, I guess for most African American mothers, the plight of that individual the understanding and being able to resonate with the fact that literally before the entire world, someone lost their life that did not have to lose their life. And so having to, on a day-to-day basis, speak to your own sons and help them to have some balance in what they have just viewed and understand that that does not negate that every individual officer who is out there on the force operates from that perspective, and that you too, as one that's in the community, have a level of accountability in terms of how you are responding when an officer arrives on the scene. And so while it's unfortunate that as an African-American mother, I have to have those conversations, not only often, but sometimes daily, to prepare them before they exited out that door. But I have to do that in a way that it ensures that the greater probability that my sons return home healthy and whole and yet alive is pivotal for me. But at the same time, much like what my fellow officers have said here, working in the judiciary, we have the responsibility of ensuring a level of accountability in the court systems. And so my role that I am most proud of through the Music City Community Court is that I have the ability to make the difference every single day in terms of how I treat an individual to walk into that courtroom and help them to feel humanized, help them to be able to leave that environment with a level of dignity, and also to ensure that they leave that environment feeling that they have found some form of justice. You know, even if it may mean that there is a sentencing that goes down, but the fact that they're treated as a human being and that they walk away from that environment feeling that they have been justified.
Absolutely.
For me, even today, hearing the conversation, it resonates with me of just the toxic trauma of being a black man. And one thing that I said to my colleagues when all of this was going on, we was in the midst of a staff meeting, was that it is exhausting being a black man in America. So that's the feeling I have, just exhausting to have my mother call from Georgia, where are you? How are you doing? Every time I leave the house, for my wife to say, be safe, what golf course you going to, where you gonna be, I need to know. Just that heavy burden of carrying that. And so again, it makes me realize the impact of just toxic trauma, that as a black man, I carry that daily.
Pastor?
Well, for me, I had two corresponding feelings and responsibilities, right? As a man, as a father, as a black person, my first reaction was the same as everyone here. It was shock, it was horror, it was challenging to watch, it was hard to watch. But then on the other side of the track, as a pastor, as a leader of the congregation, I had to gauge my reaction, right? To stand up in front of a group of people who I knew were going to be on, in a church like this, you have people on both sides of it, right? And we have members of our church who are in law enforcement. We have members of our church who are not. We have members of our church who've had negative interactions with law enforcement. For me, it's always easier when you always understand it from the other person's perspective, from their side. And so beyond the uniform, beyond the responsibility, I know that they are people. And I knew that the people, my greatest dread was standing up Sunday morning and knowing that they were going to want a reaction. You know, what's going to be your response to this? How do you want us to respond? And they were gauging their reaction based on how I was going to position it. And it was very challenging, because at the end of the day, we're just people. And this was just one of those situations where it was like threading a needle to have an appropriate reaction that did not spark more negative response based on where I was as a human being. So I had a lot of mixed feelings in there and had to hold it together and be able to responsibly lead our congregation through this and make sure that our response was appropriate in this situation. So.
Yeah, you all hit on so many different things. But I want to talk about something that you said and something that our brother over here said. Yeah. You said there was a responsibility. Yeah. The responsibility of specifically African-American church leaders in today's time to help navigate the conversation, especially when African Americans in America are now, and have been for a while, right? I think in close community, to say that it is exhausting at times to face what is going on in America. And we know, I've seen it, you know, I've worked closely with the courts, I've worked closely with law enforcement, you know, I visited the church, so, you know, that I see that majority of individuals try to do right most of the time, regardless if you're in a uniform or not. Right. There's a higher expectation when you take that oath, though, and I think we all agree to that. Yes. There is a higher expectation of trust that we place in law enforcement, trust that we place in our court systems, right, for equity and fairness, but specifically around the church's response. How do you think, or what do you think is a role or the appropriate measure that the Black church can take or should take in this time, this day and time, to help educate, inform, and leverage communication and partnerships for us to move forward from here?
Well, I think that we can't just take the position of hatred and anger to the point that we neglect dialogue and conversation, right? We'll never get anything done yelling at each other from across the fence, right? The moment you confront people, they get confrontational, and it never gets anywhere. Right. I think that as a church community and as a pastor, it is my responsibility to create a neutral place that we can have both sides be able to talk about it and be able to come to some sort of conclusions that will satisfy the needs on both sides. As I look at these gentlemen here in these uniforms, the fact is that they are people too, who have dealt with issues that we know nothing about on a daily basis, right? Who want to get home to their families, who are dealing with pressures and issues and problems that none of us have to deal with on a daily basis. I sympathize with them in this regard that when you take on a uniform, just like I take on a collar in a ministry, there's expectations that are placed upon us. We're put on pedestals, and we're expected not to be human and not to have feelings and not to have all those things. And I think that what we all have to do is have some place where we can really talk about it and not just yell about it. And I believe that, like you said, there are good people. And I hate the idea that we judge a whole system based on the actions of a few, right? Absolutely. We are not against, and I want to say clearly, our church and our community is not against law enforcement. We're against those who abuse it, you know? In any system, you could take a law enforcement, government, a church. There's always going to be somebody who misrepresents what we stand for. And if we don't have an opportunity to sit down and talk about it, it just continues to escalate and gets worse, and we never come to resolve. Absolutely.
So we just had a new panelist join us, and I'm going to allow her to introduce herself.
My name is Sanera. I'm just a community advocate, just wanting to be in the mix so that there is a better mutual understanding between people of law enforcement and then people like me who don't always know what's happening on the other side, but being able to vocalize my concerns and understand where you're coming from as well.
Absolutely, and welcome to the panel. So let's talk about community policing a little bit. We touched on the importance of community engagement and how we move forward. The Community Policing Consortium. Okay, let me just redo that. Okay. So I'm going to talk a little bit about community policing, and we've already touched on the importance of community policing in today's time, the community coming together with police officers, but I want to dive into a deeper understanding. A research on community policing indicated or highlighted that community policing is a collaborative effort between the police and community that identifies problems of crime and disorder and involves all elements of the community in search for solutions to these problems. So the idea is this coming together for an output, right? I think the conversation is one component of community policing, how we, engage in conversations like this, but we're all looking for the outcome, right? Like what can we see different? Some of those might be CompStat measurements, right? If CompStat is still going on. But some of them may be felt in the community. And Gordine, I'm going to start with you. I want to get your take on community policing and what it looks like in today's time, and really how that methodology has evolved?
Well, we really look at it as community engagement now, not necessarily community policing. We feel like that's the most important aspect of what we do. At the present time is getting the community involved. It's funny that you bring this up because that's how I actually met Pastor Faison. Was at a community engagement. Is actually Inspector Imhoff's when he was a commander over at East Precinct, and we met down there, and that's how we actually met. And I never actually had this conversation with him before, but I'd be interested to know how he felt about me when I first walked through that door and he saw me. Did he see me as a police officer? Did he want to, or did he see me as a black man, or did he just, how he actually saw me? Yeah. And then I got up and spoke, and I believe Pastor got up and spoke, and we just kind of hit it off. And he got to know me, and I got to know him. I said, this guy sounds like he's a pretty nice guy. And we had lunch soon after that. And again, as soon as we saw each other, we picked up right off, and we just had a great conversation. We actually came back here. He had just started remodeling the area, and I brought some other officers with me. And that's what it's all about, is getting to know each other. And, I always say this, it's kind of hard to hate somebody that you know. If you don't know them, it's real easy. All it takes is one wrong move, say the wrong thing, and all of a sudden you have a negative whole attitude about that person. But if you've built that relationship with that person, and had those conversations, those tough conversations, and they see where you come from, and they understand where you're coming from as a black man and as a police officer, then it just helps build. You can build from there. And that's the message that we're really trying to put out to the officers on the street. It's about getting out there and letting the community get to know you. Don't be the person that goes out there and just talk. Listen. That's our job, is to listen to the community, find out what their problems are, what their issues are. Maybe they have a negative view of police. Maybe instead of you just talking, listen and hear what the root cause of the issue is, and just explain to them, and break it down and explain to them that, look, first of all, not every police department is the same. Right? Not every police department operates the same way. Not every police department is trained the same way. What happened in Minneapolis, how they train there, their policies there, they're not the same as here in Nashville. So when people hear that, then they kind of take a step back and they understand. People in my own family really don't understand that each police department is its own police department, and it's trained differently. They have this view.
Even in the same state, right?
Yeah. They have this view that police department in Virginia, that we all operate the same way. I have to explain to them that every police department is different. Get to know your police department. That's having meetings like this is great. We love this. When Pastor Faison called me about this, immediately I said, oh yeah, I'll be there, and I'll try and bring some more people, because this is how we start to make those inroads and people understand us.
Yeah, absolutely. So community policing to you, as a community member, as a leader in the church and a leader in the school, what does that mean to you to hear the words community policing or community engagement, and what is the impact that has on you?
For me, in my role as the coordinator of restorative practices for Metro Nashville Public Schools, it is all about collaboration. We have some great SROs. We've even trained several of our SROs at the East Precinct in our rites of passages curriculum, which is a curriculum that we use to work with black and brown males in our schools. And so when I hear police or community engagement, is no different than what we say at Metro Schools, is listening, is having equitable opportunities for all to collaborate, to sit down and come together as thought partners, to look at things like we use youth court, to look at diversionary practices, trying to dismantle that cradle to prison population. So looking at things, listening, understanding that, yes, we do have high expectations, but also we're going to have high supports, as we like to say, in restorative practices. And then, of course, for me being a member at this church with Pastor Derek Faison, I'm ecstatic that we are doing these things at my church. I can say at my church. We are making this impact. We are intentional about supporting and serving. That's one thing that he preaches and teaches about, us being servants of our community. So that aligns with everything that I believe that I've been called to do.
Okay, perfect. Green, I'm gonna come to you, but I'm gonna switch it up just a little bit. So there was a period of time where policing was, straight community policing and engagement, and then it became a little bit more stat-driven, and then it became a lot more stat-driven, and it was almost like the CompStat model that was adopted in New York and Boston and other large agencies kind of it became like the foundation for many large law enforcement agencies. As we move into an era of more community engagement and kind of restoration of that engagement, how do you see trends within the police department modifying in order to meet the needs of the community?
I'm glad you asked that question. We have already modified that within the MNPD. We no longer have a CompStat meeting. We now have a crime meeting. One of the things that we have implemented is called precision policing. Precision policing is we're looking for specific persons committing specific crimes. We're not going into communities, just mass production, pushing officers out to do traffic stops and stopping everything that moves or having negative encounters. So precision policing allows us to hone in on very specific persons that are committing crimes within the community, and removing those persons, but allowing at the same time for community engagement. The purpose of the community engagement teams, each precinct has a community engagement team of all 8 precincts, and the purpose is we've identified areas where violent crimes are occurring, and they're in those communities 24/7. They stay in those areas, they respond to calls for service. This allows, as Sebastian stated, for the officers to get to know the persons in those communities. If every week a different person is responding, or every day at that location, each officer is going to handle it differently. But if I know that I'm responding to a call for service at your house and I go there 3 or 4 times, you're going to remember who I am. The other purpose is to also address quality of life issues such as homelessness, such as codes violations, trash, things of that nature. Not only are we there to police, but we're also to address quality of life issues. So precision policing has allowed us to be able to do that stuff as well. And identifying those subjects and removing them has allowed us not to over-police communities, which are unintended consequences, such as the Driving While Black report. So.
Yeah, I love that. So precision policing. So you're telling me that there's no more flex teams?
No more flex teams.
No more flex teams. That's huge,
yes,
right?
That's huge. Yes.
Precision policing and the unintended consequences. My God, like that part, right? Like the unintended consequences that come from placing policies in order for law enforcement officers to follow and then never going back to do a status check. What is the impact, right? Like how is that impacting in a tangible and intangible way? I love to see that evolution.
Well, it's already showing that that over policing didn't lower crime.
Yeah.
Precision policing has lowered crime. Putting officers in place over and over again where crimes have already occurred, being present, not necessarily doing enforcement, just being present deters crimes from being occurring, but also helps build relationships. So we're seeing dividends on that already. So,
Yeah.
yes.
Relationships are so critical and key. And I think having key individuals in law enforcement roles, in the court role, in the community and Metro Schools role is all important, because if I can see those key individuals and I can see a similarity, right? Like either is from the same neighborhood. We may not even be of the same race, but same neighborhood, or same college that we attended, or same race or same gender. And so as we think about the evolution, and I know that Chief Drake, who's a dear friend, and I think he is a rock star. We are blessed to have him in the city. Chief Drake has put a focus on diversity in recruitment, right? And as an MTSU student, right, as a local kind of grassroots gal who is doing amazing things in the city, give me your insight or your perspective, if you will, on what do you think that having a more diversified police force, specifically more women, more people of color, all different races and nationalities, what do you think that will do for community engagement?
I personally believe that it'll bring more understanding to someone that's on the other side, because there is this thing when you see someone that's like you or that's not like you, whether they're wearing the same kind of clothes as you or if they're wearing a uniform, there's this automatic like, oh, with a police officer, oh, there's a fear there. So what can we do in that way? But if I'm seeing someone that looks like me or someone that's taking the steps to understand someone like me or the fears that I have the same way, then I'm expected to understand the duties that you have and the fears that you have or the thought process that you have coming into a situation and what that looks like. So I feel like it'll help balance that out a little bit more.
Yeah. What is the current conversation with young adults in America about the current topics of police, criminal justice reform? Like, what is the conversation? I like to think that I'm still in tune with the college kids.
Likewise.
And then I realize when I'm trying to do the Dougie, and y'all are like, that's out. So tell us, what's the current conversation? What's the temperature?
It goes up and down with just different conversations that we have with like the climate of the world and the things that have occurred in the last year and a half. And even beyond that, your first initial thought is, I'm scared. That because for me, it's easy to say that you should know how to do these things, or you should know this is how, when you're in the face of a law enforcement or someone like that, that this is how you should react. But the thing about humans is you never know how you're going to react until you're in that situation. And a lot of the times, if we don't know what's going on before, that fear is hard to, it overpowers everything. And so that's what a lot of the conversations with me and, my friends and the people that I hang with, it's what can we do next? Because we know the problem. Most of the time, unfortunately, we know the outcome, and we know that that's trying to get better, but what can we do, and how can we prepare ourselves for whatever is going to happen, if that makes sense?
Right,
so that's a lot of the
no, it does. And I think that, just from personal experience and running state agencies, I think the media plays a huge role in the conversation, right, and what we see. But there are so many interactions that people will never see, and that's a good thing, right? Because they were done in a way that was appropriate. And so, but it does not mitigate or negate the fact that when those incidents happen that all make the hair on the back of our neck stand up, that those are not important, and that they don't have merit for the way that you and some of your peers feel. It absolutely, really all of us feel, right? It absolutely does. But there are so many interactions that are not captured. And so thinking about media, I'm gonna come back to you, Tamara, because I got something special for you. But Commander Imhoff, are you a commander? Are you a you just keep promoting up, so.
Currently it's inspector.
Okay, inspector. What do you see as far as the media's role and responsibility as a part of this conversation?
I've heard so many things since just sitting up here. I've heard Pastor talking about creating spaces for dialogue. Mm-hmm. I've heard listening is more important than talking. I've heard collaboration. I think the media has a role in creating those spaces for true communication and dialogue, as opposed to one side or the other, instead of trying to inflame issues to try to get the people at the table to talk about these issues. One thing that I think is extremely important is not just to have, like what we're doing today, have one conversation. We have to build relationships, okay? And then we have to have continuous conversations. So we see trends. So if, God forbid, there is another tragedy somewhere in the country, that relationships have been built here in our city, and we have continuous conversations so we know each other, and we can talk to each other, and we can talk to our communities as a united front. I think it's not just listening, it's also acting. I think one of the important things that's happened recently was the mayor put together the policing policy advisors. I think there was over 40 people. Yeah. There was a lot of diversity on that group. Yep. And you mentioned Chief Drake, but he's already acted on the recommendations very quickly. Mm-hmm. So I think the media plays a huge role in giving a good, distinct picture of what's going on, hearing all sides of an issue, and talking about what's going on locally, not just putting a national narrative on everything and broad brushing issues. Talk about what's happening here in Nashville. Talk about what relationships have been here in Nashville. I think we've really gained ground when the community sees the police as part of the community. and when the officers see themselves as part of the community they serve.
Yeah, absolutely. So we think about, community engagement. We think about the justice system as an overarching backdrop to really this whole conversation. And the criminal justice system is much broader than the police department, right? The initial interactions most of the time are police engagement, and that's why it's so critical. But a huge component is the court, right? And when an individual is introduced into the justice system, the response of the court, and either what we've seen in so many years past, the over-punitive model, and we know that in America we have, 5% of the population, but 25% of the incarcerated population in the world. We know that we have more punitive models, and we know that financially, we can't sustain it. Socially, we can't sustain it. It's a bipartisan issue, right? That this criminal justice reform now conversation needs to be put in action, and more needs to happen. And just for context for our viewers, police reform and criminal justice reform are kind of two different subsets, kind of like first cousins, but not in the same house, right? Like in the same apartment building maybe, but not in the same apartment. But I want to hear, Tamara, I mean, you're doing some amazing things with the court and with your judge that you work for. And so I don't know how much I can go into who you work for, but I'm just gonna say, you can edit that part out. I'm just gonna say, you're doing amazing things with the court. Can you give us some insight on how criminal justice reform and kind of the police interaction plays out in your day-to-day operation?
Yes, and it's quite all right to acknowledge my judge. I want her to be acknowledged for the great work that she's doing in this community. And so while I work for Music City Community Court within the General Sessions Court, Judge Rachel Bell is the brainchild who birthed out Music City Community Court. And I want to for just a quick moment, share with how that came to be. Very few individuals recognize or know that in 2018, the Brookings Institute did a research study that literally showed that in Nashville, Davidson County, zip code 37208, which is North Nashville, was #1 in the nation for incarceration rates. It was also identified that zip code 37207, out of that top tier, was number 23 out of the list of 25. That is astounding when you think about all of the cities in the United States. As a result of that, you talked a moment ago about the ComStats. One of the things that, because we are a small team, but one of the things that I loved about it is that we are dual purpose. And so while I was the former judicial court officer, I started delving into those ComStats, which we now call, like you said, those crime records that we look at to identify what were the offenses that most individuals within the community, and in particular in the 37208 zip code, were being arrested for or cited for. And then how do we take the power of the courts to transition that in a way where it results in a positive outcome for that individual and servicing them in a holistic way. And so what we have decided to do and what we've built this court to do is to look at those offenses, determine what are lower level offenses or misdemeanor offenses that could be treated or responded to in a way that ultimately do not end or yield in long-term incarceration. And how do you bring all of your other community-based agencies to the table to help this individual walk away from that situation, again, feeling humanized, feeling that there was some justice, that there is a restorative practice in place as opposed to a punitive practice, and that does an outcome that yields them a new lease on life. And so I want to just quickly delve into that a little bit. Yeah. What that actually looks like is oftentimes not having to have court only in the courthouse, because you have individuals who literally live in communities where they may be marginalized, they may have some mobility issues, they may have lower income base, and so they can't always afford to come downtown or take 3 or 4 buses to get downtown to the Justice A.A. Birchie building and then have to pay, or if they drive, have to pay for parking that may result in $18 to $24 because they sit in a courtroom for 4 hours or greater. Then you go through a checkpoint. Then you go before a court system that you do not have the resources where you can afford legal counsel that you pay for. And so you have to get a court-appointed attorney and or a public defender, and they are amazing in what they do. But I just wanted you to be able to see some of the disparities for someone who comes to the table with limited resources. And so what role can we play as the court to create some change? One of the things that we have done is we've built a court inside the community where many of these marginalized individuals can literally come to the court within their community and have their case heard. We also have partnered with community-based agencies so that if an individual comes into the courtroom who has mental health issues, who have a drug addiction, who maybe is on probation but do not have the resources to meet all of the probation conditions, we have decided to be proactive in bringing all of those community-based agencies to walk along that journey with us and to ensure that we have mental health service providers there that will service that individual. We have those that come to the table who maybe provide food services or provide child care assistance, who maybe have access to better housing, to try to, as he mentioned earlier on, to try to identify those quality of life issues that may have caused this individual to commit the offense that ultimately landed them in the courtroom. So then how do we as the court system respond in a way that transforms what that would traditionally look like and give them the opportunity, again, as I stated, to have that restorative justice as opposed to the punitive justice. And I'm super, super proud that we've been able to work with our law enforcement here, as well so as our public defender's office and our DA's office, and we've come together collectively to look at those offenses and identify those that we can say, hey, this would be a candidate that would be, a great fit for our care diversionary court, because that 18 to 30-year-old, we also know is that same demographic that was impacted by that research study in 2018. And how do we get them to the table and be able to ultimately dismiss those charges if they go through the program and give them a new lease on life, and hopefully help them to become a contributing part of the community, as opposed to someone who is getting caught up in the criminal justice system over and over again.
And Inspector Imhoff is actually building a program that falls right in line with that. He may want to address that.
Well, right now, and we've talked a lot about how we're transitioning as a police department. We're trying to address those issues. 37208 comes up, and I think in daily discussions right now. And I think there has to be a review of all of our practices when dealing with not just that zip code, but as a city as a whole. When we see something that shocking, that is the #1 incarcerated zip code in the country, we need to look at all practices. I think as a police department, we are. Chief Green alluded to it. We don't have flex teams anymore. We've transitioned away from CompStat. We're trying to listen to the community more, reacting to it, going to more precision policing. We've established my office, which is the Office of Alternative Policing Strategies that Chief Drake created, I believe, February 1st, where we're already addressing mental illness and putting together a co-responder team where we're collaborating with Mental Health Cooperative, putting clinicians, master's level clinicians in the car with officers in North Precinct and Hermitage Precinct as a pilot. We're also looking at juvenile diversion. We're also looking at a gun violence reduction program. But I think it has to be a review of the entire city. We have to look at these areas and look at economic opportunities, vocational opportunities, educational opportunities, employment opportunities, healthcare. We've already talked about mental illness, but when you live in these high crime areas, there's a lot of community-based trauma from that too. And we need to address that as well. So I think it's something that we have to look at all aspects of our city and how can we improve and not just one.
Yeah, I love that. I love that. And I love the idea of transformation and reform, right? In the sense of once justice involved individuals coming through your courtroom, but an awareness that there's a responsibility or a collaboration that needs to take place even prior to someone getting involved in the court system. I mean, Nashville to me has always, and I'm not just saying this because I live here, but Nashville to me has always kind of been a model in some way or form in the way that we do things, either it's the court or it's something that's going on in local government or maybe the police agency. But now it seems like a synergy where all parties are aligning to elevate in a way that we've never seen before. And so it's not siloed wins, it's comprehensive wins, right? And the outcome, what that produces for community members, right? Because regardless of where you sit, we all are a part of Nashville's community, right? Like it's all a part of Nashville's community.
I think one of the things that I'm very excited about is the mayor's office has created the Office of Community Safety. So we have the Office of Community Safety Partnership, and they've created a board, provided funding. I think infrastructure is key in answering the call to fixing these problems. I heard everybody talk about putting folks on the right track, and we don't have funding to do that or the resources. So with this funding, we're currently putting together different tiers for nonprofits to be able to provide their services to individuals that have those issues, whether or not it's housing, whether or not it's mentoring, whatever it may be. So having the top-down approach from the mayor's office to the police department, to the court system, is really, I think in the next 5 years, going to be pivotal for Nashville and really erasing away the 37208 demographic. So.
Right. Outstanding. So I want to go around and get final thoughts, but before I do so, Pastor, anything that I missed before we get final thoughts? No. Okay. All right. So I want to go around and get final thoughts about, where do we go next, right? Like, what is next on the horizon in a collaborative format? Green, you mentioned that, there are some things being done to really elevate the conversation in the next 5 years and move forward in a way that we can see results, right? I think that the community wants to see those results in every area of our city. The younger generation, right, up through the folks who have been on for 20, 30 years in the police department. And so I'm going to start with you, Gordine, and we'll work our way around. But where do we go from here? What do you see?
I think probably the best thing we can do as a community is have more community meetings. All right, you don't necessarily have to even have an issue or a topic to really discuss. It's just getting together, getting to know one another. Like I said earlier, once you do that, that starts the healing process. When you have a relationship with the police officers in your area, and you see some, we talked about the media earlier, and you see something that happens around the country, you can sit there and say, I'm pretty confident that wouldn't happen here, because I know the type of officers that we have here in this police department. I know the type of training they have. I know their ethics. I think that is probably where we need to go and just keep building from there.
Absolutely.
I would say intentional collaborations. Everything that you just said about in the adult system, we're seeking to do in Metro schools with our youth court as being a district that is pro-restorative practices and not punitive. So intentional collaborations amongst all of us, and that includes churches, police, community, courts, schools. I think also from these meetings, these engagement opportunities to have action steps. Because one thing that I know when I sit down and being a black man and being a graduate of Tennessee State University and being in spaces, one thing I hear communities say is that, so now that we said that, what's going to happen? So we need to have these conversations, but we also need to have some measurable goals or some action steps that follow up, and then to be able to evaluate that and to then be able to share that data that says, hey, this is what we did, this is what we said, this is what you all said, this is what we did, where do we go now? And what I mean by that is bringing community to the blueprint stage of it, not after government or political figures have gotten together and collaborated and come up with a plan and then say, hey, here's what we want to do. No, have the people from the community of all these sectors come together from day one to plan this out.
Yeah, absolutely.
Kind of stole my thunder, but I'm gonna sum it up in 2 words. We have to have the discipline to deliver. We have to say what we mean what we say, and do what we say we're going to do. The execution of all of these things that we're talking about today have to come to fruition, and we have to stay out of our silos. We have to stay in communication, and having the discipline to deliver means we're going to hit some bumps in the road, but we still have to continue on and execute the things that the community wants us to execute. We have to become the police department that the community wants to see. We have to police alongside the community that we're policing in. And most importantly, I'll leave y'all with this, is that as a department, people have to know our hearts in order to trust our hand.
love that. Well, Imhoff, how do you follow that?
I would say seize the moment.
Yeah.
Take advantage of the opportunity that's right here before us.
Yeah.
You know, we're at a unique opportunity right now, a unique situation where we are having these conversations now, and we need to take advantage of those. And as a city, as a community, we need to take action on them.
Yeah, absolutely. Tamara?
I'm probably going to get in trouble for this one a little later on, and that's okay. But I want to piggyback off of what each of us have said right here, you know, as a core. Maintaining that level of accountability on those of us who work in the various systems to continue to have these conversation pieces. And as you stated, to have those action steps when we walk away that we can truly implement so that we have some measurable goals, you know, that we can measure that outcome. But also to raise the level of accountability on our churches, because our churches have always been the pillar of the community. And I would love to see us go back to that platform where we were more vocal about some of the barriers or the challenges that we see in our communities, but more importantly, to be more open-minded, to bring our younger adults to the table and to give them a voice in that space and to have them heard and to know and understand that what they bring to the table is very, very tangible. It is very valuable, and it could literally be the key to transforming some of these practices that we've had in place so that it does bring a level of equity to the table, so that it does bring a level of restorative practices to the table. You know, oftentimes, I often say, those of us have gone along this walk for a while, sometimes treat this as though we have the answers because we've been on the road a little bit longer, but sometimes we need to be willing to take a seat back, let others speak and have them be heard, and see how do we fuse that in with our experience, with our wisdom, and with our common practices to see how do we change that trend so that it's something phenomenal and something powerful and something that then can be viewed at by other constituents across the U.S. to, you know, to model that, to create change.
Yeah, absolutely.
As a person of the community, just really seeing that accountability that we've talked about, and not just in theory, but in practice as well. And also just the communication, but creating more interpersonal communications with people to be able to really be able to see on both sides, because again, it is easier said than done. Making people's voices feel heard. I think that it's amazing the steps that have already been taken from the actions and things that have happened in the past. But yeah, just that accountability, that communication, and then also it's easy when you have a community meeting, because normally the people that are there are people that want change. But then you have like schools where it doesn't start in a middle school or a high school. This starts from the fundamental principles of the person that you are. Me being a Black person in America, I watched my dad be scared of things. I watched these things, and these are kind of fundamentals that grew on me. So as a person of the community, that's also hard to break. So I feel like these community meetings or these like coming together meetings where it's like, okay, this is where it's at. Let's lay it on the table again from the blueprints, and not just, okay, we've decided this is what it's gonna be, and from here, this is how we'll implement it. Because then it feels like we don't have a voice in that either, if that makes sense.
Right.
And so,
I love that. All of that, all of you. I'm going to ask Pastor to come up and give us his final thoughts as well, because the church has a huge responsibility. And if we're driving accountability, I need your thoughts on this.
Listen, I'm so glad for all of you that came out today. I learned so much from all of you. Thank you for being open to this dialogue. I think that all good communication opens with people willing to sit down and at least talk from their perspective. So I appreciate you taking the time to do this. I'm taking away things that you have shared from your perspective, and I'm sure our viewers are getting a chance to hear from your perspective, to hear your hearts, and to also be willing to sit down with people who live here, who work on other sides of the issue. And I appreciate you being willing to come to our church and have this conversation. I'm one of those individuals who is very concerned, as you stated, with the position of the church sitting by on the sidelines and watching all these interactions happening, and this like watching a volleyball match. and never getting into conversation, never talking about anything, and never opening the doors to say, hey, let's come in and talk about it. We are quick to march, right? We're quick to talk about what we're against, but we're not so quick to talk about what we are for. And I'm hoping that this conversation will be the beginning of many that will begin to heal our community, to heal the people who are being affected by it on both sides of the issue. And I want to make a commitment to you that our church will be one of those churches in this city that will continue to lead the charge and ask people to come and sit down, let's talk, let's bring the temperature down, bring the understanding up, so that we can begin to be the great city and the great church and the great community that we are destined to be. So I thank all of you for coming and be a part of it. Thank you, Alicia, for leading this conversation, doing an outstanding job. Appreciate all of you from the community, and I appreciate all of you that are going to be watching us online. You can email us, you can text us, you can Facebook us, you can Instagram us, and continue to send us questions about this. This is not going to be the end. We're going to continue to talk about these sort of things, but I'm just glad that you took the time out to be a part of the conversations. I appreciate all of you.
Absolutely.
Right?
Thank you.
For the invite.
Well, I'm going to invite you again. Thank you all for each of your perspective. So listen, that's our time, and I appreciate you just taking this opportunity. I hope that something that was shared will help you to help fix your or help your perspective of what's going on. I think that God has us in a unique position that we can now turn the page and be a part of the conversation. I heard somebody say this, and I think it's true. They said that if you're not in the room where decisions are being made, then you'll be in the yard and suffering the consequences. And I prefer to be one of those individuals that's in the room. And I hope that you that are watching me are also involved in that, being in the room, in the conversation, and helping God use you to heal. I think that this is a moment that God has called us uniquely to bring healing to the situation. Not to add more anger or add more fuel to the fire, but to find a way to use our walk with God, our relationship with God, and begin to heal all the way around. I thank God for using us in this moment. Amen? So thank you for your time, and thank you for watching, and I'll see you next time.
Hey family, here's what's going on right here at the Impact Church. Calling all volunteers, we're looking for volunteers ready, willing, and able to serve in the following areas: the Kids Zone Sunday School, the Media Department, the Ida B. Wells Initiative, and we're in need of CDL licensed bus drivers. For more information about these volunteer opportunities and more, contact us at 615-226-9927 or visit the Welcome Center in the lobby. Stay healthy and be safe right here at the Impact Church. COVID-19 vaccines will be administered by licensed healthcare professionals right here at the Impact Church. The first dose will be on June 14th from 3 p.m. to 6 p.m. And 3 weeks later, the second dose will be available on July 5th from 3 p.m. to 6 p.m. The vaccines are free, but all participants should pre-register in advance. Registration will open the week of June 7th, 1 week before the first dose date. Members, are you ready? You know what time it is. It's time for our monthly membership check-in. Join the Impact Church family along with Pastor Faison every first Saturday of each month at 10 a.m. on Zoom. Enjoy fellowship with one another and get important ministry updates by joining via video or audio every first Saturday at 10 a.m. on Zoom. Tuesday nights are for the fellas. Every week, men of all ages join Pastor Faison to discuss a new topic. Don't miss Man Up Men's Fellowship every Tuesday at 7 p.m. on Zoom. As we continue to have in-person service at 10 a.m. on Sundays, your safety is our priority. We are following CDC guidelines to ensure the safety and comfort of you and your family. The following safety measures are implemented. Masks and temperature checks are required. Masks are available at the door. Hand sanitizing is required prior to entering the sanctuary. Hand sanitizing stations are available throughout the facility. Sanctuary capacity limits are set to provide adequate spacing between everyone. Restrooms and the sanctuary are sanitized often and weekly. We realize not everyone is ready to attend in person yet. No worries. You can continue worshiping with us online. Tune in on Facebook at the Impact Church of Nashville or on YouTube at the Impact Church. Whether you choose to fellowship with us in person or online, we look forward to seeing you. Thank you to those who have given and continue to give to the support of the church. There are 4 ways to give. In person at 705 Rivergate Parkway, Goodlettsville, Tennessee 37072. Or anytime, anywhere in the following ways. The Givelify app. Be sure to choose the Impact Church of Nashville icon and look for the picture of Pastor Faison. Online at impactchurchnashville.org. Or you can text to give at 615-802-6573. If this is your first time tuning in, whether in person or online, we hope you join us again. Our worship service times are 10 a.m. Central Daylight Time every Sunday morning and 7 p.m. on Wednesday nights for our virtual Bible study. That's this week at the Impact Church. You've got the news. Now stay connected. Follow our YouTube, Facebook, and Instagram pages for more inspiration and information. Thanks for watching and have a blessed week.